Okay, welcome everyone again. I'm Sam. I'm currently a graduate student at the University of Toronto in the Faculty of Pharmacy. I'm currently studying the interaction between the nervous system and how we function as human beings. I've spent a lot of my undergrad teaching critical reasoning, and recently I've been affiliated with OneHub and in teaching critical reasoning at the secondary school level. So the topic that I'm going to be talking about today is how do we use critical reasoning and how do we apply it to the current COVID-19 crisis. And first of all, some disclosures and limitations. I have no conflicts of interest to disclose. I will not be offering any medical advice, and please refer to Public Health Canada for any further guidance that you may need. So our agenda for today, I want to keep everyone updated on COVID-19, make sure that we're all on the same page. I'll be giving you guys two important toolkits you can use to approach this crisis. The first is, I'll be talking about this from a more philosophical approach, what an appeal to authority is. And secondly, I'll be talking about the very basics of how to read scientific literature. So you can take your sources directly from the information from scientists, not necessarily from people that may be spinning it a different way. I'll have some concluding remarks, and we can have some questions and answers at the end. So this is just to get everyone on the same page about COVID. COVID is a coronavirus that is 15 times more fatal than the common flu. And individuals with pre-existing health conditions are at a much higher rate of complications from COVID-19. Furthermore, some individuals that have COVID, individuals with COVID are 10 times more likely to be hospitalized compared to those that have a common flu. And this disease can be readily spread by those who don't have symptoms. So having seen these points and having seen some of the evidence for this disease, we know that it is a very severe, and it is something that we should be worrying about. But how should we be approaching this? How should we be listening to the news and media all the time, or should we think about this critically and look at the evidence behind other decisions at the higher level and what the media is saying? So what are some people saying about this, and how do we know that they're right? So the first quote was by Dr. Nancy Messonnier from the CDC. She said, "We can and should be prepared for this new virus to gain a foothold in the US." So as I'm going through these quotes, keep in mind who these people are, what they're saying, and what kinds of qualifications that they have to make their statements credible. Second quote was from President Donald Trump on February 26, 2020. "When you have 15 people, and that 15 within a couple of days is going to be down to close to zero, that's a pretty good job we've done." A month later, LeBron James said, "We play games without the fans." No, it's impossible. I ain't playing. If I ain't got the fans in the crowd, that's who I play for. So the context for this is that the NBA was thinking of shutting down or playing without fans, and LeBron was saying that he would not be accepting the possibility of playing without fans. And lastly, we have Greta Thunberg, who has recently been known as a climate change activist. She said that, yes, this does affect elderly people a lot, but we also have to remember that this is also a children's rights crisis because children are the most vulnerable in society. So how do we know who's saying what and what they're saying is correct? So from a philosophical perspective, this is known as an appeal to authority or power. So in philosophy, we have something called arguments. An argument is a claim or a central belief that you have, and all those statements before can be viewed as a claim or an argument. So what is an appeal to authority or power? This happens when someone important or someone in a higher place, you could say, such as the President of the United States or someone from the CDC. This is when someone in that position claims to be an expert on the topic, such that they can lend credibility to what they're saying. You're saying, look, I have these qualifications, and that is why you should listen to me. But the question is, how do we know if there is a legitimate appeal to authority? How do we know that we should be listening to these individuals and what they're saying? So the first toolkit that I'll be sharing with you guys is these 3 points. These are 3 questions that you should be asking every time you hear a claim that someone is saying. Firstly, are there any experts in this field? Is there a source? Is the source an expert in this field? And lastly, do other experts also agree with this said source? And this will be boiled down to SOX, which is a very easy acronym for you to remember. So let's go through some examples. So are there any experts in this field? So what she said was, she was talking about elderly people, children's rights, and societies. So what are the fields that we're talking about here? It's talking about elderly people, children's rights, and public health. Are there experts in any of these fields? Yes, there are. Let's move on. Secondly, is this source an expert in this field? Now, what do you need to be an expert? Usually it's a terminal degree in a relevant field. If someone has a law degree, they're not an expert in medicine, and vice versa. And again, in some cases, extensive experience in the relevant field can be used as a substitute for that terminal degree. So let's examine this quote from Donald Trump. He said, when you have 50 people and the 50 and a half are going to go down to zero, that's a pretty good job. So the question that we should be asking is, first of all, are there any experts in this field? So this field would, in this case, would be public health and epidemiology. And the second question we must ask is this source an expert in this field? Does he have any qualifications that deem him to be an expert? I'll leave that question for you to answer. And then the last question is, do other experts agree with this source? So Dr. Messonnier said that we can and should be prepared for this new virus to gain a foothold in the US. So we have to look at other experts and what they're saying. And a month later, the World Health Organization said that this COVID-19 disease can be characterized as a pandemic, and therefore a whole host of public health experts also agree that this is a serious concern. So some important take-home points is that you should be staying informed of what is happening around the world. You should be listening to the news, but at the same time, you have to be an active listener. You have to ask the three important questions. SOX. Is the source an expert? Do other experts agree? And are there experts in this field? You should be using these questions to critically assess every claim, whether or not it contains a proper appeal to authority. In other words, are these experts really experts, and should you be listening to what they're saying? You also have to accept that sometimes non-experts can make correct claims, and sometimes experts can make incorrect claims. The second part of my talk is a very quick crash course on how to read scientific literature. Why do we care about this? Why can't we just listen to the CDC? Why can't we just listen to Donald Trump say, because he's saying it to everyone, and I mean, he's the president of the United States. But sometimes the best way to dive deeper into a topic is to go back to the original scientific literature. And you might be thinking, that's really hard. I have no science background. Maybe English isn't my first language. So what I'm gonna try to help you today with is what are some basic steps to read a scientific manuscript. You might be thinking, I don't have the time for this, or maybe this might be too difficult, but in the long run, having this knowledge for yourself can be really, really useful. So some basics on scientific literature. The term primary literature refers to the original research that is presenting the scientific results. This does not mean any news reports, any collection of reports from someone, but this is the original paper that states the primary results. Another term that you must know is called peer-reviewed, and this means that this work has been critically assessed by other experts in the field, and that this finding was not just something that was put together and they're presenting their own work, but this has been gone through critical analysis by other experts. And lastly, the most important term perhaps is for a study to be a randomized controlled trial. This is the gold standard for all kind of clinical trials right now, and often uses randomization of participants, a placebo, or blinding. So what randomization does is that it randomly assigns individuals or patients to multiple groups so that you don't have biases when scientists are performing these trials. Placebos are used in some cases because we don't know if the drug actually works, so we give them a fake drug, so we know that the drug that actually should be working is indeed working. And lastly, blinding is that the scientist himself or herself does not know what drug they're providing, and therefore the scientist cannot have any implicit biases when they're conducting the study. So again, these randomized controlled trials are the gold standard for clinical trials right now. So what are some questions that you should be answering when you're reading these scientific papers? So the acronym that I have for you guys is called SCORE. The first question is, are there any conflicts of interest? Why is this important? Because if people are receiving money for this study, then you should be aware of this and that they could be interpreting the results in a certain way to suit whoever is paying them. So the first question is, are there any conflicts of interest? Are they receiving any monetary compensation? And the second question is it a randomized controlled trial? Is it the gold standard? Um, Even though it isn't a randomized controlled trial, it doesn't mean there's not good evidence. It's just that it being a randomized controlled trial sets a higher level of evidence. The third question is, what are the expected outcomes of this study or trial? And why is this important is that you should be looking, what are they actually looking at? Are they looking at mortality rates? Are they looking at recovery? Or are they looking at speech recovery? Fourthly, you should be asking, are there any results that are statistically significant? I won't get into too much detail about this, but the short answer is, does it actually mean something? Are the results actually saying something? The fifth question is that even though it's statistically significant, how big is the effect size? So for example, if I told you that patients who were on drug X recovered 2 days faster than those who did not have drug X and were on a placebo drug. So you might say, oh, 2 days faster, that's perhaps really good or really bad, depending on how you look at it. Let's say those who received a placebo or the fake drug recovered in 5 days. And those who received drug X recovered in 3 days. Wow, that's a 40% difference. That's a pretty big effect size, 40%. Now, from a different perspective, what if I said, it's a 2-day difference, but it's a 2-day difference from 13 days to 11 days. Now, the effect size dropped from 40% down to 15%. So sometimes effect size, even though the results are statistically significant, effect sizes may be a better measure to look at a study. And lastly, most importantly, do other studies confirm these findings? You might find that one study says, yay, this drug works. 10 other studies say, no, it does not work. So this is perhaps the most important point. You should be looking at all the evidence accumulated to see, is this finding actually robust? Is it replicatable? So let's go through an example. This study was published very recently, and it talks about hydroxychloroquine in patients with mainly mild to moderate coronavirus disease in 2019. So there has been a lot of discussion about this drug and its potential uses for COVID. I won't be saying what I personally agree with, but I'm presenting here one paper, just one piece of evidence on whether or not it works. So let's go through the questions. Are there any conflicts of interest? And I've cut and paste a statement from the paper directly saying that there are no conflicts of interest. And it doesn't mean that there's nothing under the table. This just means that on the surface, they're not receiving any money. There is no one benefiting from this trial. Secondly, is it a randomized controlled trial? Is it the gold standard, which uses a placebo drug, and often it uses blinding and randomization? This says that the study was a multi-center randomized parallel open label trial of hydroxychloroquine. So yes, this is a randomized controlled trial. However, if you keep reading, it actually doesn't use blinding, and there was no placebo. So these are some critiques that you should be keeping in mind. Even though it is designed well in some areas, what are some problems with this study? So this study is not perfect. The third question is, what are the expected outcomes of this trial? What is it actually looking at? The expected outcome is that they're looking at the recovery from respiratory disorders arising from coronavirus. So the fourth question, probably the most interesting, is, are there any results that are statistically significant? So do these results mean anything? Unfortunately for this study, the authors did not find any results to be statistically significant. And they said that individuals who received normal hospital care along with this drug, the probability of those who recovered was 85.4%. And those who only received hospital care without the drug recovered at a rate of 81.3%. At a statistical level, there was no difference. However, what is the effect size? Is there any difference in the number of people who recovered, or is there any difference in the recovery time? Unfortunately, from the study, there was no difference in effect size. Keep in mind, again, this is just one study presenting one finding, and to be a responsible individual, a responsible scientist, or to think like a scientist responsibly, you should be looking at all the evidence out there. So lastly, do other studies confirm these findings? So I'll leave that up to you to dive into it yourself. There are some studies done in humans, there's some studies done in cells, some studies done in mice. There's a whole host of evidence out there that you should be taking into account when you're looking at what everyone is saying.
Sam,
Yep.
because of time that perhaps we can understand that there is 5 more minutes.
Yes, perfect. So just to quickly summarize, you should be you should try to take the time to read scientific literature. You should strive to be an active reader and remember to score everything that you're reading, and be aware that you should never derive your understanding from a single study. So over the course of this MIDI session, I have given you two toolkits. Firstly is to evaluate appeals to authority. Whenever someone is saying on the news, who is this person? Do other experts agree? And is the source actually an expert? And should you be listening to them? And secondly, when you're trying to read scientific literature, remember to look at these 5 key points. And if you don't have time, perhaps one amazing resource is COVID-19 Central. This is run by a collection of medical professionals and scientists in Canada, and it collects a lot of the original research articles and it summarizes them and puts it into writing for you guys to read in a much easier format. So that's that for me. Thank you very much.
I want to make sure we have some closing remark before we adjourn. There are 2 more one-stop classroom this week. The next one is Anthony Lai, and he's talking about tax consideration for doing business under sole proprietorship. So he will talk about the tax benefits, risk, pitfall, and registration requirements of sole proprietor. So you can make a better understanding if this is right for you as a successful entrepreneur. And particularly if you have friends that is considering starting a business or already an entrepreneur, this is going to be very, very interesting topic and significant for them. So Anthony is one of our partner at OneHub. He's been a CPA and CA, LPA for many, many years. Very successful, and he has his own practice, but is kind of lending us a hand to help us to advance our knowledge in tax and business. So I'd like to ask you to come and join us again on Wednesday. And also the invitation will be forwarded to you very, very shortly in your social media. Eddie, any other closing remarks before we adjourn?
It's very good information, Sam. Thank you so much. I think about you really struck my mind. Talk about the conflict of interest. I think in quite a lot of scientific literature are funded by some big companies. Actually, they want to get some results to supporting their business. I remember there's a very good case that we talk about coming from Kellogg's, the breakfast cereal company, that they really would like to fund that. They want to mention that the breakfast is good, right? And actually, this is how these coming on the literature results. And it's a very good information for us to think about how we look on the cases and separately. I thank you so much, Sam, once again. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam.
For having me.
Thanks, my friend. The chat box, a thank you note for Sam. That would be great.
Thanks, Tom.
You guys have a great day. Enjoy the weather. I think that the shower is coming tomorrow. So if you have a chance, step outside and enjoy the good weather. It's going to be very hot. So hopefully we can all hear from you on Wednesday. Thank you so much.
Okay, looking forward to. Okay, bye.
Thanks, Sanga. Thank you.